On this week's episode of the 360 on Energy and Carbon podcast, we are featuring a special leader segment. In today's episode, we are joined by Catherine O'Brien, Senior Vice President of Corporate Affairs, Regulatory, Government Relations, and Sustainability for Nestlé Canada. In this capacity, Catherine is responsible for corporate reputation management, including internal communications, stakeholder relations, media relations, issues management, government relations, creating shared value programs, and community partnerships. She also oversees the regulatory and consumer wellness team and is responsible for management of the company's environmental sustainability strategy and programs. Now let's get into the episode with Catherine. Welcome back, Dave and John.
It's good to be back.
I'm excited again to have this podcast. And
we've got a guest today, so it gets more interesting.
Yes, and we have quite a few exciting guests for our listeners this year. Today, we're joined by Catherine O'Brien, Senior Vice President of Corporate Affairs, Regulatory, Government Relations, and Sustainability at Nestlé Canada. Welcome, Catherine.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here.
On today's episode, we will be talking about all things sustainability. So in your role as SVP of Corporate Affairs, how do you balance sustainability goals with the regulatory and economic pressures facing a global company like Nestle?
You're starting out with a very good question. Well, first of all, I don't know if it's helpful to spend just 30 seconds, just a little bit of context in terms of Nestle and Nestlé Canada so that everyone understands sort of who we are and what we do and what we make. I think everybody has their own experience with a Nestle product. Every time we talk to someone, they're like, oh, I grew up with that. And oh, I used to have that all the time. So Nestle is, as you probably know, the world's biggest food and beverage company. And in Canada, we are also a fairly significant food company. We have various different businesses. So I think that kind of maybe set some context for the conversation. So we have 9 different businesses that operate in Canada, all under the umbrella of Nestlé Canada. So I work with all of those businesses. We have a confectionery business. We have a beverage and coffee business. We have an ice cream business, a bottled water business, which is imported water. We have a infant nutrition business. We have a professional business, which is what sells to hospitality. Nespresso, you're probably familiar with, Nestle Purina Pet Care, as well as a Nestle Health Science business, which is quite different. All that to say that we like to say that we make products from the beginning of your life to the end of your life, and we make products from the morning with your cup of coffee to the evening. So we're pretty broad, and I only share all of that with you for context to put into the picture the scope of what we make and therefore the impacts that we have and the efforts that we have towards sustainability. So everything for us really starts with the purpose of the company, and we are very, very committed to the power of food to enhance the quality of life for today, but for tomorrow. Everything kind of starts from that. And then as a global concept, and what we also live by in Canada, is our concept of creating shared value. So when you talk about the question of how do you balance business need with sustainability, they're actually very much interlinked. So creating shared value is a concept I'm sure many are familiar with, but it's really where we look at our business goals and society's goals and where do they intersect. And then where they intersect is where we put our energy. For us, we really look at people and food. We look at people and pets. We look at people and communities and people and the planet. So that's really, in order for us really to continue to provide those products that people know and love, we have to have sustainability really ingrained in the business. So it's not really an either or, it's a cohesive effort to do that.
if you don't have the planet and you don't have the people, it's a moot point to have a product. So yeah, it's really pretty essential. And that's great to learn. Now, Catherine, you have 30 years of experience across a variety of industries. You've been with Nestle for over 20 years. What have you learned about driving change in corporations, and how are you implementing that in your sustainability in the corporate world? Can you share with our listeners how you're doing that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I've learned so much and I'm continuously learning. So I think that's the best part of my job is I get to work with super smart people and I learn from them every day. So that's an ongoing effort. But I think a couple things I've learned. The first is that purpose really drives action and change. If people can be aligned to a common purpose, that really is what will propel us to do things differently, to come up with unique solutions and so forth. I think it also holds us accountable to each other and it challenges us. I feel like Purpose really speaks to both the head of why we're doing it, but it also speaks to the heart. I'm a very purpose-driven person. I think we need to come at challenges from that purpose point of view. The second thing that I find is that anybody who takes a complex problem and says, oh, it's simple, it's black or it's white, it's simple, the solution is simple. There is no simple solution. Everything is complicated. Everything is nuanced. It doesn't mean that we're not able to solve those problems. But I feel like people that simplify things actually make me quite nervous. And I think that they're not solving for anything. Most meaningful things that we do in life are hard, right? And they're hard for a reason, because they will make a big difference and be rewarding in the process. The third thing is that you can't solve these challenges, or even opportunities for that matter, alone. So it's really about working with like-minded other companies and organizations, civil society, government. We all have to work together and row in the same direction, because Nestle is doing a lot of great stuff, but there's no way that we can do it by ourselves.
Thank you for that. I want to sort of drill down into one of the components of sustainability, which is carbon reduction. And my question to you is, what's inspired Nestlé's Canada's approach to carbon reduction, and how does it align with Nestlé globally?
Carbon reduction is a critical piece of our sustainability efforts, and we have a significant opportunity to make an impact there. And Nestle is a Swiss-owned company. We have this large global organization that helps us scope out a framework of what we're going to do. But it's not so prescriptive that the individual countries where we operate, like Canada, can't customize the solution. So everything starts with a global sustainability roadmap that was developed, and that has sort of some key areas like regenerative agriculture, packaging, energy, and so forth. So from that sort of global roadmap that really focuses on our net zero ambitions, then we take that as Canada and scope out our situation here. And we really look at our full value chains from farm to fork, so to speak, but really looking at where are the impacts Nestle is making directly, sort of that, obviously those scope 1, scope 2, but then where do our partners, where do our co-manufacturers, where do our ingredient suppliers fit, and scope 3 as well. So what we've done is we've actually taken the global roadmap, created the Canadian roadmap, which really clarifies where we're going to put our energy and focus. From there, it drills right down to our 9 different businesses that I mentioned, and each and every business has developed their own roadmap, and we've been able to assign a carbon number for each of those businesses. So it's really coming right down from the broad to the specific. And that's where we sort of start, and that's where we get to. So for us, that's the approach that we've used in terms of carbon. It's extremely, important for us, but we really can't do it unless we have that granular understanding and know where we can make impact and then where we can influence others along the way.
You've talked about a commitment to net zero. Something we're noticing in a number of jurisdictions is net zero has become a bit of a binary political football where it's bad, it's good, or whatever. How do you feel about that?
Well, I mean, for us, you're not going to get progress unless you have a plan and a goal. So for us, that's absolutely the goal that we have, and we're working backwards from that. Does it mean that there's sometimes not small tweaks to things and how you get there? But we are, firmly committed to that net zero commitment. It's a milestone that we're all moving towards and trying to adjust and meet incremental milestones as we go. So for us, it's a guiding principle that we're following.
Based on that answer, it sounds there's certainly a commitment to this whole philosophy. You're not wavering, which we're finding some businesses are for various reasons. The next question, we know that 80% of carbon emissions comes from energy usage and the type of energy you use. Can you share any specific innovations or programs Nestle Canada has implemented to reduce energy consumption or minimize your carbon emissions?
Yeah, definitely. I'll speak specifically about our Canadian initiatives, which are connected to global, as I mentioned. So for us, in terms on the energy side, I would cite an example of the RE100 commitment that we've made. We're a member of the global initiative that encourages, as you know, companies to transition to the 100% renewable electricity. So we have set this ambitious goal for the company globally that 100% of our own sites will have renewable by 2025, end of 2025. That includes Canada. So that's an important part of our net zero roadmap. Some other examples of maybe more on the emission reduction piece is that, as I mentioned to you before, that we have plans for each business and function within Nestle to reduce carbon emissions. On the functional side, one of the things we've been doing is within our supply chain and transportation network. Canada's a big country and we got to ship things a long distance from one end to the next. So in terms of logistics, we have really prioritized greenhouse gas emission reduction. And so that's a lot of work going on there by our experts in that area around optimizing the route, low carbon, transportation and so forth. And a lot of work being done around efficient warehousing, because that's also a great opportunity around energy reduction as well as around carbon reduction. But we've also moved to 95% of our super long haul transportation going by rail. I'm told by our folks there that going by rail has reduced our greenhouse gas emissions by up to 75% compared to road. For us, having those strategic partnerships, like I said at the beginning, we can't do this by ourselves, but having those strategic partnerships with railways and using that sort of intermodal opportunity ensures that we can move the amount of freight that we have to get products to consumers, but we can lower emissions in the process. So that's something that our supply chain function has taken on and been very successful with. Maybe more of a business example as we think about carbon reduction, I would throw out the example of dairy. And Nestlé Canada, Nestle overall is a very large purchaser of dairy globally, but Nestlé Canada is a very large producer of Canadian dairy. We have a large ice cream business and other businesses like confectionery that also use dairy. As we map out our carbon emission footprint, it's a very big source of our scope 3. And as we look at even globally, ingredients in general are 2/3 of our global footprint. So that's really where we're putting a lot of energy and effort in. Nestle has a lot of expertise around dairy and trying to get to sort of net zero dairy, and there's lots of projects around the world. In Canada, I would say we're at the earlier stages of the conversation around dairy emissions. We definitely want to be part of the solution. It's that's a perfect example of a very big, challenging issue, but we're at the beginning. So we're having really good conversations with other partners, obviously the Dairy Farmers of Canada, as well as the government, as well as our partners and dairy processors to really figure out how can we try to support the dairy farming community towards efforts, at the farm level to reduce carbon emissions, be that through farm practices, manure management, crop rotation, biodigesters, whatever that might be. So I cite that as an example of a very much a work in progress. The good thing is that there's alignment towards what we all want to do. And now we're just trying to figure out what role each of us plays in doing that and really supporting the farmers along the way. So that's another example of how ingrained our efforts are within our business. We need to be able to get those emissions down.
It's quite impressive. Based on all the things that you conveyed, are you making this information transparent to the public based on the success and what you're doing? Why I bring that up is it does two things. One, it actually does confirm to the marketplace that actually can be done. Mm-hmm. And two, it can confirm, certainly, as you've already conveyed, Nestle's intent and purpose, that you actually are doing it. Is that something that you make transparent to the public when it's successful?
Yes, I would say for sure. Definitely. I mean, we're proud of our accomplishments. We're acknowledging the big journey we have ahead, and we're quite transparent about both of those things, I would say. And it's done in different ways. Globally, we have a Creating Shared Value report, which is done on an annual basis, and it's a proper report according to all the global certification programs and so forth. That comes out at the same time as our financial annual report in March, I believe. So there's a lot of information there. We're quite transparent in terms of our goals, how we're tracking what we've accomplished. We do a similar Canadian snapshot of that. We predominantly report numbers globally as opposed to getting too specific on the country, but there's a lot we do talk about within Canada. So that's on our website. We make that all available that way. We also have a lot of conversations with folks. We attend a lot of conferences and share our learnings and learn from others. We're big collaborators. I would say we do share a fair bit of information, and it's all validated by the appropriate bodies that do that.
Thank you, Catherine.
Thank you. Yeah, I want to move on to another plank of sustainability, which is packaging. When you've got food and other products, packaging is essential that it doesn't go off, it reaches the consumer in best condition, da 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 da. But
Yeah.
what we know is that globally, certainly amongst in the developed world, the big sort of anti-plastic in packaging approach, plastic pollution in the seas. Now, I'm going to preface what I'm going to say. What we do know is quite a lot of this plastic isn't directly from consumer use. Some of it comes from the fishing industry and other things like
Mhm.
that. But my particular question is really, what steps is Nestlé Canada taking to reduce plastic waste? And how does this contribute, or does it contribute, to a circular economy?
Yeah. No, that's a very good question. And certainly packaging is a very large focus for us in terms of the role that we play. And I love that you made a couple comments in terms of the role of packaging, and it is quite different in food, as you acknowledged. And this is another challenging problem, but one that we can sort out, because you don't want to solve one problem and cause another, because packaging in food protects the integrity of that from spoiling. It allows a little bit longer shelf life in addition to quality and so forth. So you don't want to create a package that shortens the shelf life, and then you've got food waste, and that's another whole problem altogether. It's not like a box of t-shirts or something, right? It serves a very different purpose, packaging. And I think our overarching goal, which is really, we do not want to see any of our packaging end up in nature. That's our very simple kind of mantra. As it relates to packaging and specifically to plastic, we have, I guess, a three-pronged approach to that. The first one is really using less plastic. So plastic has a role to play, and it's important in many products. But there are opportunities where we can use less of it or transfer to a different type of packaging. So the first is use less of it. The second is, when we do use plastic, though, let's make sure it's in a format that can be recycled. And then the third thing is, let's make sure once we've done those two things that there's actually an infrastructure to support the recycling of that, right? So those are the three steps.
Yeah.
And again, we work with lots of other people to get there. Maybe a couple of examples to bring it to life might be helpful. So when we talk about less packaging, that's like reducing the use of virgin plastics. We have done some work, for example, on Smarties packaging, where it was either in a multi-layered cello bag. Sometimes there was some sort of plastic tubes and so forth. Anyways, we have moved our Smarties over to responsibly sourced paper pouches. That's a step on the journey. Is it everything? No, but it's a nice step. That's enabling us to use less virgin plastic. In terms of getting the plastic where it needs to be recycled, we call that design for recycling. And we have also targets around how many products need to meet design for recycling. We want to ensure that the products that we have are ready to be recycled. They're not multiple components. One example is we have Coffee Mate liquid. It's a coffee enhancer that you put in your beverage, and they are in PET bottles. And it used to be a little complicated for the consumer because there was the bottle and there was the label, you had to take it off, and we had instructions and so forth. But now, because there's been these innovations in sort of shrink wrapping, those sleeves that go on the outside means that the entire bottle, the sleeve, the cap, and the container can all be recycled together. So they just go right into the blue bin. So it's a simple, small example, but it's an example of how, A, we're making it easier for consumers so that they can recycle, and then B, that the package is ready to go. And then the third part is even trickier, probably in many ways, is ensuring that we have the right recycling systems in place. In Canada, pretty much all the provinces have moved towards extended producer responsibility, meaning the government used to pay for recycling. We paid for some of it, depends on the province. And now legislation has said that the producers of products like ourselves are now responsible 100%. So we 100% pay for recycling, or will eventually as it's gradually rolled out. And we 100% manage the organizations that do that. The responsibility shift has been big. It's coming with a big cost for us, but we're happy to step up and take this over. We will hopefully get to a place where there's more efficiency. Nestle is one of the founding members of a very large producer responsibility organization in Ontario, the biggest one really, that's managing recycling. So we are actually helping, along with other companies, competitors, and customers, create a system that we hope will be more effective, more efficient down the road, and will make things so much easier and much more effective in terms of recycling. So those are the three places we focus our energy around plastics. And that's why I'm saying at Nestle, we don't do the easy thing ever, but we do the right thing. And I do feel strongly about that. I've been here for over 20 years and involved with all of these things. And these things are tough, and it requires a lot of people and a lot of effort, but I think we get to a good place, and that's where we're charging forth on plastics.
Yeah, it's interesting, your response there. I was thinking about packaging and things we get. I always look when I've got some packaging, could I use it for something else? Because there's all, and sometimes, and I mean, it's interesting. You talked about ice cream. I've seen it here. We've moved from plastic ice cream tubs that were really reusable. We've now gone for paper ones with some of the products, which are not so reusable, but are very recyclable. And I think this really touches on your comment about it's not binary, it's not simple, one solution to it. And then the other one that I smiled at on this is we're allowed product placement in this thing. I'm a great fan of your coffee products. Somebody gave me a little present, which is a super little device for taking the capsules, knocking all the coffee out of them. And so you've then got the aluminium left, which I then donate to a charity fund that raises money with it. But I've actually heard people criticise the Nespresso pod because it's using aluminium, which is actually one of the most recyclable materials that you can get.
Yes.
Yeah, it's not easy, is it?
And John, as a Nespresso consumer in Canada, they give you prepaid return pouches so that you can recycle them as well. So, I mean, we're clearly some Nestle users over here, and we are users of the recycling portion too.
Well, this is not a commercial, but we all are actually.
I just finished 3 shots of espresso from Nespresso, so...
Okay. Well, that's good. We need to fuel people with coffee, but yeah.
A challenging question for you. What are the biggest challenges you faced in implementing sustainable practices in a corporation as large and diverse as Nestle, and how have you overcome them?
Yeah, that could be a 5-hour podcast. Yeah, for sure. I think, well, there's a bunch of things. I think I would try to pull out 3. Most things I find are a challenge and an opportunity at the same time. When you do your performance review at work, the best thing about you is sometimes the challenge for you too. It feels the same. I would say things like scale and complexity, I think are a challenge. Big ships are harder to maneuver than small. Yeah. So for us, we have to figure out how do we leverage that scale. Some of the things come down to something as basic as standards. For us, how do we overcome the fact that we are this large food company, that we have 500 factories around the world, that we buy ingredients from pretty much all types of ingredients. For us, there's some standardization which can help us overcome that. For example, we have a responsible sourcing standards. So that is a really important tool for us because it is a set approach that we use with all of our suppliers in terms of how they operate their business, their ethical standards, and so forth. We monitor those folks through diligence, through audits, and so forth. So there's many other examples, but our scale means that when we make a change, it has a big impact, but the scale can also slow you down. So I think that's where things like standards and so forth come into place. I think there's always going to be, this is probably true for almost every challenge, even outside of sustainability, but that resistance to change, not within the company, well, perhaps within, but also outside. Change is hard for people. Doing things differently is hard for people. It's ultimately, at the end of the day, behavior change, right? We're talking about, I mean, we can do everything we want to do and should do and offer, but if nobody does it, then it doesn't make any sense. So I think the work that we do, for example, in whether it's dairy farming, cocoa, coffee, whatnot, in communities around the world, what we try to do with the farmers is to show the benefit of the change to them. And so that kind of helps with the resistance to change. And also, supporting them with whatever is required. I think the other 2 things, maybe I said 3, but I think I mean 4. I mean, to be honest and transparent, the cost implications, there are lots of sustainability initiatives that energy conservation will save us money, which is great. But there's a lot of things that will cost more to do them right. So I think we're trying to figure out the best way to do that and to get efficiencies in other parts of the company. So really it's about putting our resources in the right place. And we have prioritized sustainability. Even cost from a consumer point of view. I mean, we're living in times we're all experiencing. Food pricing is very high. The economy is challenged. We got geopolitical things going on, uncertainty. So the consumer is really reluctant to pay more. And I think we all would feel the same. So it's how do we manage that? How do we even explain to the consumer when we have made a change, why? That's a challenge. And then the last one, it's not as much of a challenge for us, but it comes back to us, is around data. Data is so critical in sustainability, and we are quite sophisticated in terms of how we measure ourselves. But we also work with a lot of suppliers and some co-manufacturers, and they maybe aren't measuring the same things we are. So that's a responsibility for us to help bring them along, which is certainly something we're doing. So those are kind of the main challenges, I would say.
And that's brilliant. Can I be cheeky? Put in
Of course.
a supplementary question. There are a lot of people who, when they're looking at sustainability and everything else, promote the vegetarian or vegan lifestyle. How is Nestle looking at plant-based alternatives and their impact on sustainability?
Well, we have options in the plant-based space. It's an important driver for some consumers. I don't think it's as mainstream. I think people are more flexitarian. I don't know about you, but
Yeah.
I do eat meat, but I also try not to eat as much. And so, doing a combination. And I think there's pros and cons in terms of the sustainable impact of those. Obviously, we've seen reports around meat and so forth. We've ventured into some plant-based coffee enhancers. We've got some meals and so forth. We're guided by what the consumer wants.
Right.
That's where I would say we certainly have offerings in plant-based space, and we also still have significant offerings in the non-plant-based space, and we'll take our direction from the consumer on that piece.
Thank you. Yeah. Makes sense, your answer. Yeah.
Catherine, this has been such a great episode. To end off this episode, what is the biggest takeaway for our listeners? We usually like to leave them with one or sometimes three of biggest takeaways.
The biggest takeaway for me is that this is a journey. We have a roadmap, but a roadmap kind of goes on and on. We're on the journey together. I think we're doing a lot of great things, but we got a lot of other things to solve for still. And we need to work with partnership. We are open for business to work with anybody who's interested. We want to hear from, other stakeholders, from consumers. And as I said, we exist at the service of our consumers. So I think it's just, we're on a journey, and we welcome partnership and input along the way.
Thanks for that.
Yeah.
Dave, what's your biggest takeaway?
I think this was a clinic.
It really was.
To understand how it is a journey. You have to look long term. It's purpose driven. You have to create collaboration. This is not a silo. This isn't a sustainability department focusing. It's getting all the business. At least that's what I'm hearing. This is embedded within the organization, because if it's not done, they may not have a company or consumers to use the product. It just makes really good sense. There was a lot of golden nuggets in this, Catherine. Thank you for sharing.
John, what's your biggest takeaway?
I'm going to go for two, since you said we normally have more than one. I liked your statement early on, and I think it's one that could be used by a lot of people, about purpose driving action. I think we would add to that, obviously a big part of that is understanding and defining that purpose before you use it. You talked about managing change. I'm a certified management consultant. We're supposed to be an agent of change. And the big problem with change is getting people to understand it, adopt it, and everything else. Mm-hmm. But being able to go back to that touchstone of what's our purpose is really good. And then I liked your line, no packaging in nature. And I think that's a really good line, because that is one of the biggest issues, raising public negativity about packaging. I don't know about the rest of you, but you're talking about producer responsibility. I'm going to name and shame. Locally, there is a well-known international hamburger chain that you find their product up to 1 mile or 2 miles away from their outlet. And That's not the supplier, it's the consumer, but then that can get into nature. So I think the idea of trying to stop packaging getting into nature, I like that. That's a nice one. But I'm with Dave. There's so much in there. It almost feels wrong just to pick out one or two.
And you two missed my favorite one. My biggest takeaway. I like the concept of, not everything needs to be simple. And I think a lot of times, especially in this space, we really try to keep things simple. But you're right. Sometimes it's just not. And I think we need to accept it and just tackle the problem. So I really like that statement. Well, Dave, John, Catherine, thank you for a great episode.
Thanks very much, everyone. Thank you, Catherine.
Thank you. It was a pleasure. Thank you.
That's all for today's episode of the 360 on Energy and Carbon podcast. Thanks for listening. Make sure to check us out on our website at 360energy.net and follow us on LinkedIn at 360 Energy Inc. Tune in to our podcast on Apple Music, Spotify, Anchor, or other listening platforms by searching the 360 on Energy and Carbon. You can watch the video recording and subscribe on YouTube at 360 Energy Inc. Email us your feedback at podcast@360energy.net or comment on our LinkedIn posts. See you next week.